Hingamana, hingareo, hingata wida pumanawa, ro rakatidama, tenakoto, tenatato katoa, norera, ko wayo, ko Harleen Hain takawingawa, ko te tumuaki o te wharewanaka o atako aho. Na mihi nui kia koto, norera, tenakoto, tenatato katoa. My name is Harleen Hain, and I am the Vice Chancellor here at the University of Otago, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this inaugural professorial lecture for Professor Jessica Palmer. On behalf of the university, I would like to begin by extending a particularly warm welcome to members of Jessica's whānau who are in the audience tonight. Her husband, Nick, and her parents, Charles and Ann Rickett, and her sister, Tamara Walker, are all here to support Jessica. Now, Professor Rickett is the Dean of Law at AUT, so I suspect that this is a particularly proud moment for him. Now, these IPLs are incredibly important occasions for us as a university community, so having members of family here makes them even more special. Thank you all for coming. Now, in addition to Jessica's family, we also have some other special guests here this evening. In honor of the university's 150th anniversary celebrations, the Court of Appeal is sitting in Dunedin this week. And I am delighted to welcome Justice Christine French, Justice Forey Miller, and Justice Graham Lang, who have taken time out of their very busy schedule to attend this IPL this evening. Your presence here is incredibly important to us. Now, as I look out on the audience tonight, I see the typical cast of characters of academic and professional staff and students from around the university and members of the wider Dunedin community. I also know that given the nature of tonight's talk, there are also members of the legal fraternity who are in the audience, including many judges from the district court, president of the Law Society Association Otago branch, John Farrow, and the convener of the Otago Women Lawyers Association, Karen Billinghurst. Now, sadly, the one person who is not here this evening is our Chancellor, Dr. Royden Somerville, QC. Unfortunately, Royden is actually being a lawyer today, and he couldn't be here with us, but he sends his very, very best wishes to Professor Palmer for her IPL and wishes her the very best on this very special occasion. So in short, whether you've come here from across the campus, from across town, or from across the country, no mai, haramai, welcome. Now, as you are all well aware, the path to professor is not an easy one at the University of Otago. It requires excellence in teaching, in research, and in service to the university and the wider community. And Professor Palmer, as you will learn very shortly, has excelled in all three of these areas. She is a well-respected legal scholar, she is a gifted and popular teacher, and last, but certainly not least, she has provided exemplary service to the law faculty, the university, and to the legal profession more generally. Now, in addition to all of these achievements, Professor Palmer is also the first female dean of the Otago Law School. As part of our 150th celebrations, we would also like to add this achievement to our list of reasons to celebrate this year. Jessica's name will forever be linked to those of other first women at Otago, including Caroline Freeman, Ethel Benjamin, Emily Seidenberg, Winifred Boyce-Smith, Via Papa Annandale Atherton, and many, many more. All of these women fought battles so that others no longer have to. So Jessica, on behalf of the university, no. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to give your inaugural professorial lecture. I am personally very proud to have you as the Dean of our law school. I will now call on Professor Nicola Pert to tell us a bit more about Jessica's academic journey to professor. Norera, tenakoto, tenatato katoa.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's an honour and a pleasure to tell you a bit about Jessica's journey to professor. Jess joined the law faculty as a lecturer in 2005. Those of us who attended the seminar she gave as part of the application process will remember two things: her passion for equity, and in particular the law of trusts, and her enthusiasm for teaching. She was only in her mid-20s at the time and had never met any of us, but she engaged us in an extremely lively discussion about the essence of a trust. She had no written paper, no PowerPoint slides, just the whiteboard, a whiteboard marker, which she climbed all over the board, her excitement, and the command of the subject area. For us, the decision was easy. She would be an inspirational teacher, especially in front of our large compulsory second year class, and an excellent researcher. We also realized that we would be gaining a great citizen and a wonderful colleague with a joyous, loud laugh. And now she's our leader, or boss, as I sometimes call her. She doesn't like that much. Jess came to New Zealand as a baby when her parents, Charles and Anne, moved here from the UK. She attended Barradine School in Auckland and then did law and accounting at Auckland University. We will forgive her for that. Only just. After graduating, she joined Chapman Tripp, one of New Zealand's big three law firms, but legal practice was not really where her passion lay. So she accepted a job as a judge's clerk at the High Court, doing research for the judges, including Justice Miller, who had just been appointed to the bench. Jess then pursued postgraduate study, obtaining an LLM with first-class honours from the University of Cambridge. It was there that she cemented her interest in the law of equity, that strange system of law that developed alongside the common law system administered by the English courts of justice to moderate the harshness of the common law. Jess will explain more about that in her lecture. Academia and her love of equity are in her genes. Her father, Charles, shares those interests. In 2008, Charles spent a sabbatical with us and co-taught a new paper that Jess had developed on commercial equity. During that time, Charles and Jess shared an office directly opposite my office. I witnessed firsthand the fiery legal debates between father and daughter. They may share a love for equity, but they disagree on much of it, sometimes vehemently so, much to the amusement of the students. But importantly, those lectures opened the students' eyes to strongly divergent viewpoints, passionately held and supported by persuasive arguments. I can think of no better way to learn. I too have benefited enormously from Jess's research and thinking. Having her so proximately located was the best thing that happened to my research and has led to several joint publications and presentations. Jess has won several awards for her teaching. She instills in students an interest in learning about the law and an ability to question. Her summaries are legendary. The large number of students here tonight is testimony to the fact that she is an outstanding teacher. Her research has flourished and is cited by international experts around the world. Important for law academics is their influence on the development of the law, and there too, Jess has had real impact. The judges are using her work in their decisions, including the judges of appeal who are here today. She was also one of only 2 academics invited to assist the Law Commission in its reform of the law of trusts. That reform is about to be enacted. In 2015, the university recognized her outstanding performance by awarding her the prestigious Carl Smith Medal and promoting her to associate professor and then last year to full professor. Work is not the only thing that fills Jess's days. During her 14 years at Otago, she and Nick have produced 4 wonderful children, Maya, Neve, Toby, and Francis, now aged 12, 10, 8, and 6. They're enjoying pizza in preference to sitting here tonight. But they make life very busy and interesting. That Jess has been able to develop her academic career and then last year take on the enormous job of Dean of Law is in large measure due to the support she receives from her husband, Nick. Thank you, Nick. We are indebted to you. I now invite Professor Jessica Palmer to deliver her inaugural professorial lecture on the lure of equity and academic voice.
You will be grateful. I didn't anticipate delivering this with the bench in front of me. We'll see how we go. Tihei mauri ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Ki ngā mate, haere, haere, haere atu rā. Te mana whenua o tēnei rohe, tēnā koutou. Ka mihi ki te manuhiri, ka mihi ki tōku whānau. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. A huge welcome from me. I mean, everyone's been covered already, but I just want to say that I'm personally just so touched to have all of you here. And as I look around, there are faces from all different aspects of my life, and I take that as just a huge encouragement to have you here. So thank you very much. It's a privilege to be an academic. The academic's role is to study an area in significant detail with the aim of contributing knowledge to that particular field, and to pass that knowledge on to the next group of enthusiastic learners. Shout out to you guys for coming tonight, thank you. Sometimes the contributions that academics make to a particular field may be substantial. They might bring massive change to the way that we understand things in this world, or the way that we do things. But for most academics, for most of the time, the contributions that we make are on their own small. They're refinements or rediscoveries, alignments. These contributions require much time and perseverance, and sometimes the effects might not seem to be that overwhelming. But when you stand back to appreciate the wider picture, you can see a patchwork of scholarship that has advanced our knowledge of the world in some way, and hopefully has made us better off for it. This evening, my task is to share with you a sense of some of the particular work that I do. And although you've heard a wee bit from Professor Peart, we do have a slight problem. Most of these IPLs are extremely fascinating. But unfortunately, if you and I were to meet at a drinks function, I'm the one with whom you strike up a conversation and very quickly look for an exit route. The conversation goes something like this. So what do you do for a living? I'm an academic. The blood is starting to drain from the face of the person. They're looking around, but they're hoping that this might be resurrected. Oh, what area do you work in? Law. At this stage, either the blood has gone completely, or they're now onto a new line of thought. Perhaps she does something exciting, like criminal justice or human rights. Either way, I know where the conversation is going. What area of law? They ask. Trusts and contracts. Oh. So, this evening is somewhat of a treat, but for me rather than you. Because you are now officially stuck for 45 minutes, and I forgot to start my watch, so I get another 2 minutes. And I will regale you on the wonder of my research interests and hopefully persuade some of you to enrol in an LLB at Otago, the best LLB you can get in New Zealand. So, the title of my lecture tonight is The Lure of Equity and the Academic Voice. First, what do I mean by equity? Our law is a messy and complicated mix of rules and principles from various different sources. Much of it in our highly regulated state comes from statutes and regulations enacted by Parliament. Another substantial source is case law, judge-made law, which we've largely inherited from the UK and over time have gone on to develop as our own. Into the mix, we add international covenants and treaties, which are incorporated into our law in various ways. And happily and importantly, in more recent times, we are seeing a concerted effort to also acknowledge and include principles of tikanga and te ao Māori in our statutes and case law. We lawyers refer to case law as common law. That is, the law which is common to the various different courts in our system. In an earlier time, that common law was applied with huge rigidity, and it led to some real injustices. A few examples. A promise is made by the promisor to a promisee. Legal fancy words, but you get what I'm saying. The promise isn't made under seal, a big fancy stamp that shows that it's legitimate, as was required years and years ago. So the common law courts would say to that, you might have had a promise, you might have had an agreement, but it's unenforceable. A second example. This time, the contract is made using the right formalities, but one of the parties is now claiming that in fact the contract was made under some kind of pressure. They were unduly pressured by the other and want out. Again, the common law is incredibly rigid and responded by saying, you've got an enforceable contract, you must abide by it, no out. A third possibility, for example, a man, and unfortunately for us women it generally was a man back then, a man takes legal ownership of property, but he makes a commitment to hold it for the use of someone else. But he then reneges on the commitment and insists on taking the full benefits of ownership for himself. As far as the common law courts are concerned, the answer was he is the legal owner and therefore he is allowed to do as he likes. These kinds of decisions were obviously felt to be really, really unjust. So individual parties suffering from these injustices would approach the king. They would ask for mercy or for some kind of dispensation of justice from the king. Over time, the king delegated that power to his chief minister, the chancellor. The request would be put to the chancellor to exercise his discretion to provide some sort of excuse from the harshness of the common law. And eventually, over time, the chancellor's exercise of discretion developed into its own jurisdiction, complete with rules of process and substance, and its own judges. And it became to be known as equity. The king's judges administered the rules of the common law, and the chancery judges administered the rules and principles of equity. And over time, the answers to these problems developed. So in relation to the first one, I made a contract with you, but we never sealed it, therefore it's not enforceable. And equity said in response, if you are a promiser, a promising party who has made a promise, you cannot renege on that promise if we can be sure that you made it and that the other party accepted and relied upon it. Equity developed a fancy doctrine called estoppel to explain that situation, and estoppel just simply means that the party now trying to renege on his promise is estopped, or in our modern day language, simply stopped, from insisting on his strict legal right to say that there is no contract. The second one, an enforceable contract, but this one made under pressure, and the common law courts had told us, too bad, you're bound. Equity said, that's not okay. And we developed doctrines in equity to give us excuses to set aside contracts. And the one probably most commonly used is the doctrine of undue influence. And then the third one, which most of you are going to be pretty familiar with, and you'll know what the answer is. Equity said, in response to a legal owner who had entered into an arrangement to hold property for another, that he held that property on trust. And that the other, who we call the beneficiary, has rights in equity to enforce that arrangement, even if the common law provided no response. So, equity arose as a separate system of justice, responding to an unjust insistence on strict legal rights. In that sense, equity has been described as another country where they do things differently. For some, it was indeed seen as roguish. But equity's existence is not independent. It is not another country. It is supplementary. It responds to a gap or a shortcoming in the common law, and that is its only reason for existence. So if the common law then proceeds to develop and dig its way out of a hole, the need for equity falls away. Eventually, in the mid-19th century, the two systems were combined into one jurisdiction, and our common law became a happy mix of the king's common law and equity. Happy? Well, that's half the problem. It gave me a whole career. It's bloody brilliant. Whether the two were intended to be truly assimilated, or whether it's better to understand the situation as a dualist system, is an ongoing debate. While the differing rules of practice and procedure have to a large extent been assimilated or integrated, many of the substantive doctrines between equity and the common law have not. So in many areas of the private law in particular, we often still talk about what we do at law in contrast to what we do in equity. This disjuncture contributes to a belief by some that equity is even now primarily a system of discretion and fairness for the individual, and is less concerned with values like certainty, consistency, reliability, and coherence, which we tend to expect of the rest of the law. But, and here's where we get excited, in my opinion, this view overlooks the development of equity over many years into a substantial jurisdiction that has its own collection of doctrines, principles, and rights. And all of those things together do justice across a wide range of scenarios in much the same way as common law has evolved and continues to do so. The very fact that I can point you to 3 doctrines in equity tells you that equity has developed into a system that enables us to do that. I suggest that some courts and lawyers have been lured into a misunderstanding of what equity is now by what it first was. Some modern cases show a preference for an abstract notion of equity that can undermine the very principles and rights that equity has developed since its beginnings. My claim is simple, as I think Stuart Anderson always says the best ones are. Equity ought not to be used as a license to do what at first glance might appear to be the just thing in a given case, if in fact it undermines the rights of parties as equity has already identified them. Such principles have been developed and have been worked out to do justice. If we do not give enough attention to the existing rights that equity has established, we end up with a body of law that is contradictory and incoherent. I'll provide an example of this shortly. It's in equity that much of my work has been concentrated, and there are 2 reasons for this. First, I find the breadth and depth of equity fascinating. I know, you're surprised. Equity applies across a range of very different contexts, from large-scale swap contracts between banks, property developments between commercial partners, real estate agents acting for both buyer and seller, family members at odds over who owns a lotto win, and spouses and de facto partners seeking to ring-fence their property from relationship property claims. These are to name but a few. Equity can have something to say in large-scale and small-scale commercial scenarios, family situations, and indeed between the Crown and Māori in its treaty relationship. Equity pops up everywhere. For instance, my husband and I have finally decided to get on with renovating our house. It's been a very long time coming. Unfortunately, spare time is not something that we have much of at the moment, so we've contracted an interior designer to manage all the detail. She seems to be doing a wonderful job. Have yet to see the finished project, but so far so good. But what if at the end of the project, we learn that she has in fact been receiving significant commissions from the kitchen joiner or the benchtop supplier, and that sees us pay much more than we should have, and it sees her pocket a nice secret profit? Am I entitled to expect that she should have acted in our interests all along while she managed the project and not made any additional profit? At least not without my authorisation. Or should I have thought to cover this in the contract, and if I didn't, more fool me? What if our contract is completely silent on this? We just didn't consider it. What if there's nothing in writing at all? Which there isn't, I've just realised. Don't ask me if I've got a current will. I raised this example really as a way to mention my long-suffering husband, Nick, who likely knew much more than I that marrying me meant leaving the quiet life and uprooting a few times as I pursued the academic road. I know that living with someone who is never quite satisfied with the present, it's me, is not easy. Thank you. And thank you too for partnering with me to raise our 4 beautiful tamariki. And the Chancellor, who's not here tonight, did say to me on the weekend, as long as I include a photo of the kids in the lecture, it will go well. And as Nicola said, yes, they did choose a pizza party with a babysitter over being here. But back to the point at hand. I'm taken by equity because of the way in which it can have something to say in so many different interactions, and the way in which it is concerned to do right. The second reason I have found myself focusing much of my research on equity is because I was blessed to be taught by some superb teachers in my undergraduate and postgraduate studies who showed me that although equity is complicated, it is also very interesting and throws a useful light on how the rest of the law operates. 10 points, if you know where we're going. Who knows where we're going? One of my teachers has graciously travelled to be here for this lecture. I don't know about gracious, I think he's more obliged. Having been taught by my father throughout the having avoided being taught by my father throughout the compulsory papers in the law degree, I had the great privilege of doing 2 optional papers under his tutelage. Dad, you remain one of the most gifted teachers I've ever had, and it's no mere coincidence that we work in the same areas of law. You have set an example for me of what a good teacher can be, and I hope that I come close to reaching it myself in time. I've enjoyed the looks of horror on the faces of both students and conference goers and Friday seminar attendants, as you have objected loudly to something I have said in a lecture or presentation, they being unaware of the familiar relationship. I do beseech you, however, to remain quiet this evening.
It's getting hard.
As an academic lawyer, it is my hope that the work I do helps to develop or clarify the law in a way that best serves society's needs. The law operates to enable us to live peacefully in the same space together. But the law, as with the humans that it seeks to assist, is not always perfect, nor is it readily understandable, and especially so with equity, as many of my students protest. Do you know, it is so good to be able to use this again. This is another mark of an academic career, is the jokes you first started using when you came on board, after a while don't work anymore. Rachel Hunter, it won't happen overnight, but it will happen. I've had about 10 years worth of students who don't get that joke. It is wonderful that Lion King is having another round this year, so I can keep this one going. So, what does the academic lawyer do? An analogy with sport might be helpful at this point. The judge is on the field with the parties to the dispute and their lawyers. The judge determines and applies the rules of the game as it is played. The academic watches from the sideline, considering the present game in the context of the objectives of the game, the history of the game, how it is played elsewhere, and how it should best be played. In between games, she pronounces, with due respect, where the judge got it right and where the judge got it wrong, in the hope that in the next game her input might be of some assistance. Sometimes this is done with the community of other academics, and sometimes she goes it alone. At times, the community moves their view from the field and spends time arguing out a difference of opinion or works through a theory of the game amongst themselves, and sometimes it's not obvious to everyone else how important that discussion is. Sometimes the lawyers and parties out on the field invite the academic to work with them to prepare for the game, or to play in the game with them, or to help them avoid the game altogether. And every so often, the rules of the game are reviewed by the officials, and the academic is invited to the table to join in that discussion. The academic lawyer, part commentator, part strategist, part advisor, part reformer. Of course, those of us who work in the law know that what is at stake is far more than a game. The questions that we work on have very real effects on people's lives. And for this reason, what we do is both a privilege and a responsibility. In some instances, my particular academic voice has been accepted, thank you, and has contributed to a clarification or a correction. In others, it has not. For let me give you a couple of illustrations in the specific context of trusts. And in order to do that, we need to go on a brief summary of what trusts are. Hold on to your seats. Ordinarily, we understand ownership of property to give us a power or a right or a liberty, jurisprudence, just hold yourself on the corner there, to do certain things. We are free to use our property, we're free to exclude others from our property, we're free to transfer our property to others. In a trust, the original owner, who we will call the settlor, may want his property to benefit another, who we will call the beneficiary. So he appoints a trustee to hold the property for the beneficiary. Equity calls this the trust, and the property owner the trustee. The trustee remains the owner legally and has the ownership powers. And so to the outside world, this is what we see. Settlor has transferred property to someone, the legal owner, who now has all the powers of ownership. But in equity, what we see is something quite different. To the outside world, little appears to have changed. But in equity, the liberty of the trustee is replaced by a set of duties. She now has the duties to hold the property for the beneficiary, to ensure that everything she does is in the interests of the beneficiary, and to follow the terms of the trust deed. Her liberty in relation to the property is severely fettered by the trust. Trusts are created for a range of purposes. Some of the reasons are about getting property to a beneficiary with the least cost or trouble. So, for example, our settlor might want to benefit the beneficiary directly, but doesn't trust the beneficiary. Our beneficiary is a spendthrift, and we're not sure what the beneficiary is going to do with the property. So instead, the property is given to a trustee to care for and make the decisions. Maybe a settlor wants to benefit several different beneficiaries and isn't sure which beneficiary should get which bit of the property. And so the settlor sets up what we call a discretionary trust, where the trustee holds the power or the discretion to choose which beneficiaries will take. Maybe the settlor owns land that has been in the family for a long time. Maybe it's a farm, maybe it's business interests, maybe it's just a very special house. And the settlor doesn't want the land or the property to be broken up. And so, in order to keep the property within the generations and across the generations, a trust is established. Maybe the settlor wants to avoid taxes that would apply if he had given the property directly to the beneficiary. Those of you who are old enough might remember gift taxes and estate taxes. All gone now, but valid reasons in some jurisdictions why you might set up a trust. There are other reasons too for why you might create a trust that aren't about getting the property to the beneficiary, but might be more about getting the property away from the settlor. Maybe the settlor wants to gain access to government subsidies and benefits, rest home care, legal aid, the old working for families benefits, all of those benefits being assessed on the basis of the settlor's own personal wealth. So if the settlor can remove the wealth from himself personally, shed his assets, he can access such subsidies. Dodgy, I know. Maybe the settlor wants to ring-fence property from claims of others. Maybe the settlor wants to ring-fence his property from claims of a lender or a creditor, or maybe even from claims of a potential spouse or partner. Maybe he's trying to ring-fence the property from claims that the beneficiary's partners or creditors might make out. So there are a range of reasons why we might create trusts, and what I don't want to do tonight is to preach on which of those is right or wrong. What I'm interested in equity is how we recognise the trust and its mechanisms. As I said, most of these tax and subsidy benefits have been removed in various ways, but trusts have been incredibly popular nevertheless. New Zealanders have had a somewhat of a love affair with trusts, settling their homes and their assets on trust. In so doing, they have sought ways to nevertheless keep control of the assets for themselves. Maybe they appoint themselves as the trustees. Maybe they keep back a power to change the beneficiaries as they so choose. It's not surprising that all of this has caused some eyebrows to raise and close attention from creditors and ex-partners, lawyers, judges and reformers, all questioning the appropriate boundaries of trusts. So in case law, we've seen a series of important cases in the past decade that have attacked the modern trust on several different grounds. They're a sham, they're an illusion, or let's look to particular statutes that give us an ability to attack them in certain contexts. And they have, I think happily, become an issue of law reform. The Law Commission is having a good look at them and has reviewed them and has put forward a report and draft legislation taken up by the Ministry of Justice and now sitting before Parliament in the form of a new trusts bill. All of this has kept a trust lawyer like me rather busy. I want to give two examples of the academic voice in this context. The first one, beneficiaries' access to information. The debate here is between confidentiality and disclosure. Settlers, trustees and their lawyers claim that confidentiality is key to running the trust and they refuse disclosure to a beneficiary. And this is all the more so in the modern trust scenario where the original owner stays involved and sees himself as still somewhat in control. They may not want the beneficiary to know the details of the property subject to the trust. They may not want the beneficiary knowing who the other beneficiaries are, or what has been done with the property, or in fact even that there is a trust at all of which the beneficiary is a beneficiary. They want to keep everything secret. The approach in the case law has evolved over time. The courts used to approach this by saying beneficiaries are able to access information if they have an equitable ownership right. Now remember, going back to the reason we have trusts, sometimes we have trusts because we're not sure which beneficiaries we want to benefit, so we create a discretionary trust. In that situation, our discretionary beneficiaries would not be allowed to access the information because the courts would have said they do not have themselves a fixed ownership right. So the old approach of the courts was pretty limited. It kept on developing. I think the most common answer given by the courts in recent years is that whether or not a beneficiary has access to information is a matter for the court's supervisory jurisdiction. Equity is a creation, some would say, of the court, or at least finds its way out in the courts, and the court therefore has the power, the role, the right to supervise such trusts. So if the court thinks it's appropriate to give access to information to a beneficiary, then so be it. A recent Court of Appeal case a couple of years ago it was you. Suggested that perhaps the beneficiary's access to information was an exercise of the trustee's discretionary power to disclose. I'm really glad to say that one didn't last very long, because I find that hugely worrying. Where that took the court was to say that if they were to review the trustee's decision, you would have to show something pretty worrying, something pretty problematic about what the trustee had done before the court would interfere. In other words, we would have to show something like that the trustee had acted in bad faith when they refused to disclose, which set the bar very high. What do I think the answer is? What's the academic voice on this one? Well, there have been several academics, including me, who have argued strongly about this issue. We've argued that if accountability is at the heart of the trust relationship, if it's about trustees owing duties to beneficiaries, the only way to give that real meaning, the only way to make sure that that trust can be enforced is to enable the beneficiaries to hold the trustees to account. They can't do that if they don't have access to information. So it's a really simple claim. And it's just this, that the corresponding result of duties is the beneficiary's personal right to access information. And that personal right ought to be a presumption. Not an absolute right, because there might be some very good reasons why we will disallow information to certain beneficiaries. Maybe they're just really annoying beneficiaries, and there are some of those around. Maybe we don't need all beneficiaries of a trust to know everything. It's enough if we've got a few beneficiaries who know information. So there might be some really good reasons why we don't disclose, but the important point being argued here is that the starting point matters, and the starting point ought to be that the beneficiary has a presumptive right to access information. One of the most satisfying roles I've had as an academic trust lawyer was to be appointed to the Law Commission's expert reference group to advise them on how trust law should be reformed. It's fair to say that in a panel of mainly practicing lawyers, there was a range of views on this issue of access to information. But ultimately, both the Law Commission and the Ministry of Justice recommended a presumption that beneficiaries must be told of basic trust information by trustees, and the presumption that any other information they requested should be disclosed. That position is now in the new draft legislation, and we wait patiently for it to become law. Working with the Law Commission was a wonderful opportunity to debate the issues and have a hand in helping the Commission craft a new statute. It was particularly special to do that alongside the great, and she was very humble because she didn't say that she was also involved, Professor Nicola Peart, another person who has played an important role in my career. Nicola, I am indebted to you for flying closely alongside me since I arrived here as a young lecturer in 2005. You have been incredibly gracious with your expertise in equity and with your general nous on all things related to both the university and the legal profession. And I'm guessing every person in this room could testify to one of those three things, if not two or three of those three things. I have treasured our discussions and debates, usually carried out shouting across the hallway in our 10th floor offices. Poor Jeff Hall had to retire to escape it. I am under no illusion as to how lucky I have been to have you as a colleague and a friend. And this deanship gig has meant that we don't have the same amount of interaction which we used to. And I do miss that. I'm looking forward very much to teaching together with you in semester 2. So, an example of a very minor point that matters hugely. Here's the second example, and then I'll stop. In order to get through this example, we need to do a bit of background work. So, back to our understanding of what a trust is. So we now know that the trustee has duties to the beneficiary, and the beneficiary has personal rights as against the trustee. We've mentioned one of them. There are several other rights. If the trustee loses the property, if the trustee makes a profit with the property and keeps it for himself, those kinds of instances give rise to a beneficiary's right to say, give me the profit, or give me the loss I've suffered. They are personal rights. But another feature of the trust, and this is the one that's really cool, this is the one that demonstrates the real wonder of what a trust is. Now I said it sounds so pathetic. It's the right that equity confers on the beneficiary in relation to the trust property itself. The trustees as a group are recognised to have a property right in the trust property itself. Well, what does that mean? That means if our trustee misapplies the property, sends it off somewhere else, our beneficiary can trace or follow through to that property and claim it back on the basis that our beneficiaries have an equitable property right. That's massive. That's huge. And it's huge because it seems to fly in the face of the common law, right? So, does it? Yeah. A beneficiary's trust interest will trump a party who's been given the property by the trustee or a party who is using the property, occupying the property. But the one limit, because of this problem between common law and equity, the one limit to this right is what we call in law the bona fide purchase of a value without notice. BFP, FV, W/ON. What does that mean to the rest of you who are normal? The good faith purchaser. The person who gives something over in return for the property and did not know that the property was already subject to trust. Now, just be careful about that. It's not just that I gave something up in return. That doesn't get me home free. It's that I gave something up in return and I didn't know that the property was in trust. That is the only combination that will keep me free from the beneficiary's equitable property right. Are we seeing now how powerful the beneficiary's property right is? This is fairly basic trust principle. I need to give you another type of trust before we can attack this particular problem. Here's the second type of trust. The students are going, enough. A constructive trust. The trust we've been looking at up till now has been what we call an express trust or a declared trust. I declare a trust. The constructive trust is a trust that we say is construed by the circumstances. Something in the circumstances gives rise to the trust. And there are lots of different categories of this kind of trust. But the one that we're concerned with tonight is one that's been, well, I'm concerned with tonight, has been really popular in New Zealand. And it goes like this. Our claimant is claiming against the owner that she has made contributions to the property and that she has reasonable expectations to take a share of the property as a result. And equity says if those things exist, it is unconscionable for the owner to refuse to give her an interest. So equity recognises a property interest for our claimant. All well and good. Here's where it gets tricky. In that situation, the owner was the legal owner and had full legal title. What's been happening in the last few years is this. We have an existing trust. We're all happy with that. We've become trust experts on that in the last half an hour. And we have an outside claimant coming in and saying, I've made contributions to the trust property, and I have the reasonable expectation to receive an interest. Let me give you an example. I struggle with picking names. We're just going to go with these. Don't try and see into them what that says about me. Antonio and Petra are de facto partners. They live in a house which Antonio acquired before the relationship. He holds the house on trust for the benefit of himself and his 2 children from his previous marriage. He and his lawyer are the trustees. Petra knows there is a trust, but this doesn't concern her because it does not seem to affect their use of the house. Antonio makes all the decisions in relation to the house, and he sees the lawyer maybe once a year. Antonio has been renovating the house over the last couple of years, and Petra has helped in several ways. She has put in long hours on the weekends, sanding and painting the house. She has landscaped the garden. Antonio's money has been tied up in paying for the renovations, so Petra's income has been used to pay for their general living expenses. The parties separate, and Petra seeks a share of the house using the constructive trust argument. And the courts currently agree with her. They recognise this separate constructive trust. First of all, let's talk about why they recognise this trust. They say things like this, with all due respect. The reality of a trustee's ability to give a third party, that's our Petra, expectations in return for Petra's contributions over trust property must be recognised. Practical realities when one trustee is in absolute control of all trust activities and the other trustees have effectively abdicated their trustee responsibilities must be recognised. Are we seeing a theme coming out here? Courts, I think, have moved from talking about the demands of justice or fairness to talking about practical realities, but the intent behind them is the same. And in my opinion, with the utmost respect, this situation is a really good example of an apparently just result on first glance. It seems unfair for Petra to walk away with nothing, but that is in fact incorrect once the broader trust principles are considered. There are several problems, and I'm just going to run through 3 of them, and I'm hoping you've already figured them out. The first one relates to the beneficiary's equitable property right. The beneficiary of the original trust has an equitable property right which he or she is allowed to trace through to any transfer of property to someone other than the good faith purchaser. Petra is not, unfortunately, a good faith purchaser. She is taking an interest based on contributions she had made, but she has not purchased any property. And nor, in our situation, can she say that she knew nothing of the trust. In my opinion, it is conceptually impossible, and that's a big claim, I realise that, to say that a constructive trust should never arise in this case as a matter of principle. But secondly, even if, as some judges with respect are, you were brave enough to say that equity should still be discretionary and flexible and should go after the just result, Even if that were the case, it would be difficult to find a constructive trust here because I would suggest Petra doesn't have a reasonable expectation of taking an interest in the property. Why not? Because she knew of the trust. She should have dealt with the trustees appropriately if she wanted some kind of interest. And thirdly, even if a judge decided to ignore all of those arguments, which they do, the constructive trust would, I'm really sorry, the constructive trust would give Petra an equitable interest in the property, yes, but that equitable interest, would be in competition with the equitable interest of the beneficiaries. We in equity land call this a case of competing equities. It's exciting stuff. And equity tells us when you have a case of competing equities, the first in time wins. Who had the first beneficial interest here? It wasn't, unfortunately, Petra. It was the beneficiaries of the Express Trust. It is with utmost respect for the judges that I think they have this wrong. And I think it matters. It matters because it gives Petra a property interest she ought not to have, and it takes from the beneficiaries a property interest they ought to retain. Is there still an injustice? Absolutely. Yes, there's an injustice. What's the injustice? That Petra has contributed to the value of the property that the beneficiaries own. So what ought we to do in response to that injustice? Well, it turns out the answer to that injustice doesn't in fact lie in equity. It lies back in the common law. It's an area of law called restitution. The law says, if you have benefited me under some kind of mistaken understanding or with no return back so that it would be unjust for me to keep it, I must give you a monetary remedy to the value of your contributions. Ta-da! Petra is remedied, she finds relief, and our trust remains conceptually certain. And equity lives to fight another day. My task has been to understand and to remind others of the principles underlying equity, especially where an equitable remedy alters property rights and can have significant consequences. Some like to think that equity is a source of authority to do individual justice on the case. But in my view, justice is best achieved by the careful and consistent application of principles that are themselves just. I have tried to be an academic voice in this arena. And now as Dean, I find myself in a role where I am concerned about the academic lawyer's voice more generally. I'm convinced that despite all our strange habits, such as turning up to public lectures in old-fashioned garb, what we do matters. To students, we teach methods of reasoning and critique, the necessity of attention to detail, the importance of identifying all the competing interests and making sure that they are all weighed up. We hope that they will see, as we do, just how important the law is and how valuable their skills will become. To judges, lawyers, and law reformers, we elucidate underlying principles, trends, and concerns to help them in their roles of upholding a working and responsive system of justice, albeit that I know we can be very annoying at times. To the general public, who are often interested in and concerned about the law, as they rightly should be, we play a valuable role in keeping them informed, some of us more so than others. And we inform them so that our local and national conversations are rich and productive. The law school is essential to a functioning, robust legal system, as is the university to a free and informed society. We must never take ourselves too seriously, but we must take this institution seriously. I am both privileged and burdened by this task, and I'm grateful for the wonderful academic colleagues I work with here in the law faculty and across the university who are pursuing in their fields this noble role that is the academic's voice. And I'm equally grateful for our professional staff, for whom, without, my mind shudders to think of the mess that we might make of this place. Thank you to all of my colleagues, both academic and professional. I am touched that so many of you have come out this evening. The academic endeavour can be a solitary one, but that has not been the case for me at all in the law faculty and in this great university. The final word of thanks must go to my mother. Mum, thank you for your support and your belief in me, especially in these last couple of very demanding years for me. They have, I am sure, been much harder for you as you fight to be with us for as long as possible. And yet, you have continued to worry about me and to send an encouraging message every now and then, and to listen patiently and with comforting words. Thank you. To conclude, I have endeavoured in this lecture to convince you of two things: that the alluring nature of equity must be treated with caution, and that the academic voice that sounds that caution matters. For several years now, I have tried to inhabit that academic voice, as many of my colleagues do daily in their fields too. I have not always succeeded, but it has nevertheless been a wonderful journey thus far. If I haven't managed to persuade you on either of those 2 points, then I think the only other plausible conclusion we can reach this evening is that the university has made a rather unfortunate mistake. God bless Otago. Thank you for coming out this evening and for being a most supportive audience. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia mihi ai, kia koe, a horangi pāma. Nā mihi nui, nā mihi nui, nā mihi nui kia koe mō tō mahi. Te tino mea mō tō mahi I te roto i te whaiwaranga. Me te koutika tātou tūre.
Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Tony Ballantyne and I'm the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Humanities. And it is with great pleasure that I will deliver a vote of thanks to Professor Palmer. But before I do so, can I just acknowledge the wonderful waiata from Te Raupu Whai Putaki and the tātoko of the Dean. Professor Palmer, I think, has delivered a truly excellent lecture. She has shared her reflections on why equity is important, highlighting its expansiveness, its breadth and depth, in Jessica's words. She has shared some ideas about how equity is best understood, and as a historian, I was very interested to hear how Professor Palmer's explanation of equity's evolution and the ongoing debates over its proper place within the law illuminates our institutions and our legal landscape. In exploring these issues, she has demonstrated her ability as a communicator and as a teacher. She has taken the area of legal inquiry and made it come alive. In discussing equity and trusts, Jessica's lecture has underlined the particular responsibility of the legal academic. She has suggested this evening that that is a hybrid role, part commentator, part critic, part coach, part change agent. See, all C's, alliteration. I grew up in a household where Truth newspaper was the key reading material. And she has reminded us that it is a role that carries with it very significant responsibilities, as these legal matters have the capacity to substantially affect people's lives. She has also shared important reflections on her own academic journey. She has emphasised the particular importance of teachers, something that we can all take for granted in the day-to-day routines of our roles. And she has also reminded us of the importance of family and the people around us. This is a key dimension of academic life that is easy to underplay. Academic life may often be imagined as solitary, but it is fundamentally social. In this regard, it is very clear that Professor Palmer has been well taught, both at home and in her formal education, and she is now sharing those very considerable abilities with our students. Her lecture closed with a vision of the role of the academic that is very interactive. She emphasised the responsibilities that we have to the students we teach as subject specialists, both in their individual papers and also in their broader training. Professor Palmer also stressed the very particular relationships that legal academics need to cultivate to help propagate a healthy and just legal system and to shape and inform public debate around the law. And she reminded us all of the multiple sets of relationships that are essential to the effective functioning of a complex institution such as ours. At the outset of the lecture, Professor Palmer suggested that we would all have to tolerate her reflections on the law of trust and contracts. But 45 minutes, or 47 minutes, have flown past. Professor Palmer, you have challenged, informed and engaged us. And in so doing, you have displayed the warmth, the wit, the clarity of thought and the intellectual acumen that you bring to your role every single day. I know that all of us here, students, colleagues from across the university, legal professionals and your family are delighted to be sharing this very special occasion with you. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to join me in thanking Jessica. I do have something prepared earlier to give to her. Fortunately, it's not something that I baked. After I give this to Jessica, could I invite you all to please join us in the staff club where we have the chance to mix and mingle and to celebrate this very special occasion. But could you please join me in thanking Jessica?